Welcome to Mr. Ace Math. This lesson is on ratios. Some stuff you should know before you begin this lesson are what fractions are and how to reduce fractions. So make sure you know those and let's get started. So first of all, what exactly are ratios? Ratios are comparisons of two numbers. Order matters. I cannot stress this enough. The order of the numbers that are being compared matter. And these ratios can be shown in three different ways. The first way is to use the word 2 between the two numbers you're talking about. The second way is to use a fraction representation. And the third way is using a colon. And in case you don't know, a colon is just what you call these two dots. So let's say we have all these shapes over here. And I want to know what the ratio of circles to stars is. Like we said before, order matters. So whichever one we're talking about first should be the first number in our ratio. And whatever we're talking about second should be the second number in our ratio. Now I want this to be a little bit neater, so I'm going to shift everything around so that I put the circles to the left and the stars to the right. How many circles do you see here? Well, I see 1, 2. So we'll put 2 as the first number in our ratio. Then we'll write the word 2, and then we'll go to the second part of our ratio, which is talking about the number of stars. Well, how many stars do you see here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 is going to be the second number in our ratio. And we'll say our ratio is 2 to 5. Remember that we can also represent it as a fraction. And when we do that, the first number goes in the top of our fraction, and the second number goes in the bottom of our fraction. So that'll look like this, 2 over 5. And the third way to represent it uses a colon. So it looks just like this one, but instead of using the word 2, we'll put two dots, the colon, 2 to 5. Now here's the important thing. I have students all the time that say, okay, this is 2 to 5, and that's 2/5, and that's 2 colon 5. And now even though they're shown differently, you always read them the same way. You always read them with the word 2 because we're talking about a ratio. So when we're reading this, we're going to say the ratio of circles to stars is 2 to 5. Let's take a look at another example. Let's say we have the same stuff, but now we're talking about stars to circles. Well, I'm going to rearrange this stuff again. So I'm going to put my stars to the left, since that's the first thing I'm talking about, and my circles to the right, since that's the second thing I'm talking about. So what's the ratio of stars to circles? Well, how many stars do we have? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's going to be the first number in our ratio, the 5. Then we'll write the word 2, and then we'll address the number of circles. How many circles are there? 1, 2. So we'll write the number 2 here. Therefore, our ratio of stars to circles is 5 to 2. And there are two other ways of writing these ratios. So let's write the fraction form. So if we have 5 to 2, what should that fraction look like? On top we'll have a 5, on the bottom we'll have a 2, and it'll look like this, 5 over 2. Now using a colon is the same exact thing as using the word 2, except instead of putting the word there, we put the colon instead. So it'll look like this, 5 colon 2. But again, even though we're writing it three different ways, the way we read it is the same as the first way we wrote it. So we would say the ratio of stars to circles is 5 to 2. How about this one? This one's really tricky. What if I'm asking for the ratio of stars to total shapes? What do we think? It's not like we can separate them into two separate groups because we're addressing the total shapes. Well, let's look at one thing at a time. How many stars do you see here? Well, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that'll be the first number in our ratio. And let's write 5. Then we'll write the word 2. And now we'll address the second part of the ratio, which is the number of total shapes. Well, how many total shapes are there? I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So my second number will be 7, and my ratio of stars to total shapes is 5 to 7. Also remember, we can write them as a fraction and using a colon. If we're writing this as a fraction, 5 will go at the top of the fraction and 7 will go in the bottom of the fraction, and that'll give us 5 over 7. And if we're writing it using the colon, it'll look just like this, but with the 2 dots, also called a colon, instead. And it'll look like this, 5 colon 7. Like I've said before, even though we're writing it in 3 different ways, we always read a ratio the same way. We always read a ratio using the word 2. So when we read this, we'll say the ratio of stars to total shapes is 5 to 7. Here's another example. Let's say we have all these squares here, and I want to know the ratio of blue squares to orange squares. I'm going to rearrange this very quickly so I have the blue on one side and the orange on the other. Here we go. I got all my blue together now, and I've got all my orange together. Well, how many blue squares do you see? I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we'll write 8 first in our ratio. Then we'll write the word 2, and then we'll talk about the second part of our ratio, which is the number of orange squares. Well, how many orange squares do you see? Well, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, so that's going to be 4. So our ratio of blue squares to orange squares is 8 to 4. We can write that as a fraction, putting the first number on top and the second number on the bottom, giving us 8 over 4. And finally, we can write it with a colon, where instead of writing 8 to 4, we'll just put a colon there instead. And it'll look like this, 8 colon 4. Again, even though it's written 3 different ways, you always read it the same way, which is using the word 2. So this will be read as the ratio of blue squares to orange squares is 8 to 4. Now I want to take this a step further. And this is why I said it's important to know how to reduce fractions before this lesson was started. If I divide 8 and 4 by 4, that's going to give me a reduced ratio. And that'll give me the ratio of 2 to 1. As a fraction, that would be 2 over 1. And using a colon, that would be 2 colon 1. Now it's really important to understand what this means. The first number still talks about the number of blue squares, and the second number still talks about the number of orange squares. So what I'm going to show you right now is how we can take all the squares that we were given and we can regroup them into several groups where there are 2 blues to every 1 orange. Check this out. Here's our first group. 2 blue squares to 1 orange square. Here's the next group. 2 blue squares to 1 orange square. Here's the third group. 2 blue squares to 1 orange square. And here's our last group. 2 blue squares to 1 orange square. So when we reduce ratios, they're still equivalent, but we're just making it so that we're talking about the smallest possible way of putting the first number and the second number in our ratio together. In this case, 2 to 1. And finally, even though it's written in 3 different ways, we would read it using the word 2, and that would be read as the ratio of blue squares to orange squares is 2 to 1. Now let's take a look at this group of shapes. Now this one's tricky because we've got different colors, we've got different shapes. We've got 3 different colors here. We've got purple, blue, and orange. We have clouds, we have triangles, and we have squares. There's a lot going on here. But what really matters is what we're being asked to find. So here's the question. What is the ratio of purple shapes to orange shapes? Again, that's purple shapes to orange shapes. If we're only talking about purple and orange, do we need any blues? I don't think so, so let's get rid of them. And now we're talking about the ratio of purple shapes to orange shapes. So I'm going to rearrange them so all my purples are together and all my oranges are together. How many purple shapes do we have? We have 1, 2, 3, so we'll write 3 as the first number in our ratio. Then we'll write the word 2, as we always do in our ratios. And then I'll talk about the second thing we have here, which is the number of orange shapes. How many orange shapes do we have? 1, 2. So I'll write 2 here, and that means that the ratio of purple shapes to orange shapes is 3 to 2. Again, I can write that as a fraction. My first number will go on top, my second number will go on the bottom, so it will look like this, 3 over 2. And the last way to write it is using a colon, and that would be 3 colon 2. Remember, we only read it using the word 2 whenever we're talking about ratios. So our final answer, we would read it as the ratio of purple shapes to orange shapes is 3 to 2. How about this one? What's the ratio of clouds to squares? Again, we're only talking about clouds to squares, so anything that's not a cloud or a square, we don't care. Let's get rid of it. And now I'll rearrange it so that we have clouds on one side and squares on the other. Let's put all our clouds here and all our squares here. So, what do you think? How many clouds do you see? Well, I see 1, 2. So that'll be the first number in our ratio, 2. Then we'll write the word 2, and then we'll talk about the number of squares. How many squares do you see here? I got 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to write 4 as the second number in my ratio. Therefore, the ratio of clouds to squares is 2 to 4. If we write it as a fraction, 2 will go on the top and 4 will go on the bottom, so it'll look like this, 2 over 4. And if we use a colon, we'll just put that instead of the word 2, and that'll look like this, 2 colon 4. But remember, no matter what, we're still talking about the ratio of clouds to squares, and we're still always going to read it using the word 2. So we would say the ratio of clouds to squares is 2 to 4. I'm looking at this ratio and I'm noticing that the numbers in the ratio, the 2 and the 4, can be reduced. What number can divide both 2 and 4? I'm going to go with 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 4 divided by 2 is 2. So our ratio is going to be 1 to 2. Now remember, what you're talking about in the ratio is not changing. The first number still talks about the number of clouds, and the second number still talks about the number of squares. It's just what happens when you reduce the ratio. You're breaking it down into smaller groups. Now if this is 1 to 2, then the fraction form will be 1 over 2, and the colon form will be 1 colon 2. And what this means is, again, for every 1 cloud, you can have 2 squares. Don't believe me? Check this out. I can make them into separate groups. This group here has 1 cloud and 2 squares. And this group here has 1 cloud and 2 squares. So in this group here, the ratio of clouds to squares is 1 to 2. And in this group, we've got the same thing. The ratio of clouds to squares is 1 to 2, because you've got 1 cloud for every 2 squares. And again, even though we have it written 3 different ways, we will still read it the first way we wrote it, which is using the word 2. So we would say the ratio of clouds to squares is 1 to 2. And here's our last example. What is the ratio of purple shapes to not purple shapes? Not the best way to put it grammatically, but you get the idea. So let's make it so that we have all of our purple shapes on one side and all of our shapes that are not purple on the other. So we'll move our 3 purples over to this side, and we'll move all of our other shapes over to this side. Well, what's the ratio of purple shapes to not purple shapes? Well, let's see. Here we have 1, 2, 3 shapes that are purple. So that'll be the first number in our ratio. That's 3. We'll put that first. And then we'll write the word 2 right next to it. And the second thing we're going to write is the number of shapes that are not purple. How many shapes do you see here that are not purple? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So here we'll write 5. And therefore, the ratio of purple shapes to not purple shapes is 3 to 5. If we write it as a fraction, 3 will go on top, 5 will go on the bottom, and it'll look like this, 3 over 5. And if we write it with the colon, it'll look just like this, but with the colon between the numbers, and it'll look like this, 3 colon 5. But no matter what, we always read it using the word 2. And in a complete sentence, we would say, the ratio of purple shapes to non-purple shapes is 3 to 5. So here's your pause and practice. Just pause and practice. Hit the pause button, and when you're done, unpause the video, and followed by a 3, 2, 1 countdown, your answers will be displayed. Ready, set, go. So let's take a look at our answers. Number 1 is 3 to 4, 3 over 4, 3 colon 4. Number 2 is 4 to 8, 4 over 8, 4 colon 8. But remember, the directions ask you to put the ratios into simplest form. So we can divide 4 and 8 by 4. And 4 divided by 4 is 1, and 8 divided by 4 is 2. Therefore, this will become 1 to 2, which means this will be 1 over 2, and this will be 1 colon 2. Number 3, 5 to 3, 5 over 3, 5 colon 3. Number 4, 5 to 4, 5 over 4, and 5 colon 4. Number 5, 4 to 12, 4 over 12, 4 colon 12. But again, we have to put our answer in simplest form, and we can divide both 4 and 12 by 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1, 12 divided by 4 is 3, which means this will become 1 to 3, which will make this 1 over 3, and that will make this 1 colon 3. Number 6, 3 to 3, 3 over 3, 3 colon 3. Again, we have to put this into simplest form, and we can divide both of these 3's by 3. So 3 divided by 3 is 1 here, 3 divided by 3 is 1 here, so this answer will become 1 to 1, which means this will be 1 over 1, and this will be 1 colon 1. Now, some of my students normally say, well, if it's 1 over 1, can't we just write 1 because 1 divided by 1 is 1, and that sounds very confusing. But remember, because we're talking about ratios, and ratios are a comparison of two numbers, we have to make sure that we always have two numbers in our ratio. Therefore, even as a fraction, we'll have to put a top and bottom number. And number 7, 9 to 3, 9 over 3, 9 colon 3. And this answer can be reduced as well. We can divide both of these numbers by 3. 9 divided by 3 is 3, and 3 divided by 3 is 1. Therefore, this will become 3 to 1. This will become 3 over 1, and this will become 3 colon 1. So what exactly did we learn from this lesson? A comparison of two numbers is called a ratio. How many different ways are there to express ratios? Well, there are 3. What are they? First, we can use the word 2. Second, we can represent the ratio as a fraction, where the first number goes on top and the second number goes on the bottom. And the third way is using a colon, which are those 2 little dots. In ratios, blank matters. Order. Remember, the first thing that's mentioned has to be your first number, and the second thing mentioned has to be your second number. Be careful, don't fall for the traps.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
And thanks for using Mr. Ace Math. Don't just pass math, ace it.